What if I told you that the moment you believed you were enlightened was the exact moment your ego won its greatest victory? I know that sounds contradictory, maybe even offensive. But stay with me, because what I'm about to share might be the most important realization on your spiritual journey. Picture this. You meditate daily. You've read the books. You understand energy, vibration, consciousness. You speak the language of awakening. You might even teach others about presence, about letting go, about transcending the ego. And yet, there's this whisper you won't admit to anyone. Sometimes when you are alone with your thoughts, you wonder if you're just playing a more sophisticated game of superiority. You catch yourself judging someone for being low vibrational. You feel a subtle sense of being above the drama, above the chaos that ordinary people live in. You're not alone in this. And here's what matters. This doesn't make you a fraud. It makes you human. It makes you honest enough to see what most spiritual seekers will spend years denying. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Let me paint 3 pictures you might recognize. There's the person who moved from corporate ambition to spiritual ambition. They used to compete for promotions. Now they compete for who's more conscious, who has higher frequency, who's closer to enlightenment. Same drive, different costume. There's the healer who needs broken people around them to feel whole. They've made it their mission to save others, to guide lost souls. But beneath the surface of service lives a question they won't ask themselves: am I helping them, or do I need them to need me? And there's the meditator who sits in silence, feeling secretly superior. They've transcended anger, they claim. They no longer feel fear. They're above petty human emotions. But what they've really done is bury those feelings so deep that even they can't see them anymore. If any of this resonates, take a breath. Because what we're about to explore together is going to be uncomfortable. Your ego, yes, even your spiritual ego, will resist what's coming. It will tell you this doesn't apply to you. It will suggest you're different, more advanced beyond this trap. That resistance. That's how you know we're going somewhere real. Here's what we'll discover in the next 50 minutes. We'll uncover why the spiritual ego is actually more dangerous than the material one. We'll explore how one of the greatest minds in psychology, deeply connected to both Carl Jung empath and personal development, mapped the entire landscape of our inner deception. And we'll find the path to authentic awakening, which I promise you is nothing like what the spiritual marketplace has sold you. This journey requires something from you. Not faith, not belief, just brutal honesty. The willingness to look at the places you've been avoiding. The courage to see your shadow, especially when it's wearing robes of light. Because here's what that brilliant mind discovered: something that changes everything about how we understand spiritual awakening. The ego doesn't die. It shapeshifts. This is the insight that unravels the entire spiritual game most people are playing without realizing it. In the work exploring consciousness and the psyche, there's a crucial distinction that most spiritual teachers skip right over. The ego, that's the center of your conscious awareness, your sense of I, me, mine. But the self, that's something far larger. That's the totality of who you are, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the human and the divine. When someone starts on what they call the spiritual path, something fascinating happens. They believe they're transcending the ego. They meditate. They practice presence. They let go of material desires. They speak about oneness and universal love. But watch closely. Watch what's actually happening beneath the surface. The ego didn't disappear. It got promoted. Before it said, I am more successful than others. Now it says, I am more enlightened than others. Before it said, look at my achievements. Now it says, look at my consciousness. Before it said, I'm better because I have more. Now it says, I'm better because I need less. Same mechanism, different costume. The ego is a master actor, and spirituality gave it the role of a lifetime. You didn't transcend ego. You gave it a spiritual makeover and called it growth. Let me show you the 4 masks this spiritual ego wears. And as I describe each one, I want you to do something brave. Don't look for these patterns in other people. Look for them in yourself. Because the moment you think this is about someone else, you've already fallen back into the trap. The first mask is spiritual superiority. This is the subtle sense that you understand something others don't. You see the matrix. You're awake while they're asleep. You vibrate higher. You've accessed truths that ordinary people can't comprehend. It shows up in small ways. The way you dismiss someone's concerns as third-dimensional thinking. The way you feel a quiet satisfaction when others struggle with problems you've transcended. The way you silently judge the person stressed about their job, their relationship, their life, because you're beyond all that now. But here's what's really happening. You've created a hierarchy of consciousness with yourself near the top. You're still comparing, still competing, still feeding the ego's endless hunger for specialness. You've just sanctified it with spiritual language. The wisdom tradition understood this perfectly. One teaching suggests that what fits one person becomes torture for another. There's no universal hierarchy of consciousness. There's no spiritual ladder with you on a higher rung. There's just different paths, different timing, different journeys. When you truly grasp this, the superiority dissolves. But most people never get there because the ego has them convinced that their spiritual understanding makes them special. The second mask is the savior complex. You've made it your mission to heal others, to awaken them, to guide them toward the light. And on the surface, this looks beautiful. This looks like service. This looks like compassion. But underneath, there's a transaction you're not acknowledging. You need broken people. You need people who are lost, confused, stuck, suffering. Because when you help them, when you guide them, when you become their teacher or healer or guru, something happens inside you. You feel important. You feel worthy. You feel like your existence has meaning. The question you're avoiding, am I helping them or am I using them to feel whole? Real service asks nothing in return. It doesn't need the person to be grateful, to call you their healer, to tell others about how you changed their life. Real service happens and moves on like water flowing downhill. It doesn't stick around waiting for acknowledgement. But the savior complex, that's the ego feeding itself through the appearance of selflessness. And it's one of the most seductive traps on the spiritual path because it looks so much like love. The third mask is shadow denial. This is where you claim you no longer feel anger. You don't experience fear anymore. Jealousy, resentment, pettiness, you've transcended all of that. You've reached a state of perpetual peace, love, and light. Except you haven't. What you've actually done is become very skilled at bypassing those feelings, at suppressing them, at pushing them down into the basement of your psyche and locking the door. You call this transcendence. The psychological truth calls it repression. Because here's what happens to emotions you deny. They don't disappear. They go underground. They sink into the unconscious, where they grow stronger, denser, more powerful. And from that hidden place, they run your life in ways you can't even see. The anger you claim you don't feel. It shows up as passive aggression, as subtle punishment, as cold withdrawal. The fear you insist you've overcome. It drives your need for control, your spiritual bypassing, your avoidance of anything that might disturb your carefully constructed peace. What we resist doesn't dissolve. It persists in the darkness, gaining power every day we refuse to acknowledge it. The fourth mask is experience addiction. You chase the high, the ecstatic state, the kundalini activation, the third eye opening, the energetic downloads. The mystical experiences that make you feel special, chosen, advanced. You've replaced one addiction with another. Before maybe it was substances, achievements, relationships, shopping. Now it's spiritual experiences. Now it's the next workshop, the next retreat, the next ceremony that will finally give you that permanent state of bliss you're seeking, but you're still chasing. You're still using something external to fill something internal. You've just sanctified the addiction by calling it spiritual growth. And here's what you're really avoiding: the mundane reality of being human. The dishes, the laundry, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the simple act of being present with what is exactly as it is without needing it to be extraordinary. You can see these four masks clearly now. Spiritual superiority, the savior complex, shadow denial, experience addiction. And if you're honest, truly brutally honest, you've worn at least one of these masks, maybe all of them at different times. But why do we do this? Because we're trying to escape being human. We've been sold this idea that awakening means transcending our humanity, rising above it, becoming something more than human, more pure, more light, more divine. But this entire framework is the ego's grandest illusion. True awakening isn't ascension, it's descent. It's not about rising to some higher plane. It's about descending into the fullness of what you already are. It's about becoming more human, not less. More real, not more perfect. More whole, not more holy. And this is where the most powerful insight emerges, the one that will change how you see everything. You are split. Right now, in this moment, you are divided. One part of you is the radiant spiritual persona, the person who meditates, who speaks about consciousness, who appears enlightened. This part shines in the light, performs peace, demonstrates wisdom. The other part of you is imprisoned in the depths of your unconscious. This is your shadow, your anger, your fear, your desire, your wounds, your darkness, your full humanity. This part you've locked away because it doesn't fit the spiritual image you're trying to maintain. And as long as this split exists, you are not awakened. You are fragmented. The path forward requires something most spiritual seekers will never do. It requires turning away from the light and descending into your own darkness. Not to indulge it, not to act it out, but to see it, to acknowledge it, to integrate it. Because what you're about to learn will transform everything you thought you knew about awakening. Let me tell you about the shadow. Not the simple version you might have heard, the idea that it's just your dark side. The shadow is far more nuanced, far more powerful, and far more essential to your wholeness than that. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself. Everything you've denied, hidden, exiled from your conscious awareness. It's the parts of you that didn't fit your family's expectations, your culture's values, your own idealized self-image. Maybe when you were young you learned that anger was unacceptable. So you pushed it down. You became the peaceful one, the calm one, the one who never loses their temper. But that anger didn't disappear. It became part of your shadow. Maybe you learned that neediness was weakness. So you became independent, self-sufficient, the person who never asks for help. But that vulnerability didn't vanish. It's living in your shadow, waiting to be seen. Maybe you learned that your sexuality was shameful, your ambition was selfish, your sadness was a burden, your joy was too much. So you trimmed yourself down to an acceptable size and locked away everything that overflowed. That's your shadow. And it's not evil. It's not your enemy. It's the exile within you, the parts of yourself you abandoned in order to survive, to be loved, to belong. But here's why this matters so profoundly for anyone on the spiritual path. When you refuse to face your shadow, it doesn't stay quietly locked away. It projects outward. it becomes the world you see around you. Those people who trigger you, the ones who make your blood boil, who you judge most harshly, who you're convinced are the problem with the world, they're mirrors. They're showing you what you can't face in yourself. That person who's so needy and demanding, they're reflecting the neediness you've denied in yourself. That person who's so arrogant and superior, they're showing you the part of you that feels better than others, yes, even spiritually better. That person who's so angry and aggressive, they're embodying the rage you've spent years suppressing. The intensity of your judgment is directly proportional to the depth of your denial. And this is the mechanism that keeps you trapped. You spend your energy judging others, fixing others, avoiding others, instead of turning that awareness inward and asking, what am I not willing to see in myself? This is why it was written that those who haven't faced their own darkness will project it onto the world and call it the fault of others. You create enemies out of your own rejected parts. But it goes even deeper than projection. When you only reach for the light, when you only cultivate the positive, the loving, the peaceful, you create a dangerous imbalance. You split yourself in two. There's the spiritual you, all light, all love, all consciousness. This part you show the world. This part you're proud of. This part you identify with. And then there's the shadow you, all the darkness you've denied. This part grows stronger in the basement of your psyche. This part becomes more primitive, more powerful, more volatile, because it's been exiled from the light of awareness. You're not integrated, you're fragmented. And fragmentation is the opposite of awakening. Here's the paradox that unravels everything you thought you knew about spiritual growth. No light is deep enough unless it is born from darkness. Think about that. Really let it sink in. The most profound light you'll ever know doesn't come from bypassing the darkness. It comes from descending into it, from lighting a candle in that basement, from looking at what you've been avoiding and saying, I see you. You belong to me too. This is the missing piece in most spiritual teaching. This is what gets skipped in favor of the comfortable, the palatable, the marketable version of awakening. You cannot transcend what you haven't integrated. You cannot rise above what you haven't first descended into. Real awakening isn't reaching some lofty plane where you float above human emotion, human struggle, human messiness. Real awakening is descending into the very center of your being, the place where you are both light and shadow, both divine and animal, both infinite consciousness and limited human. And this brings us to a beautiful convergence. This is where Eastern wisdom and Western psychology meet in a profound recognition. The teaching of non-self, of anatta, points to the illusion of the separate self. It invites you to see through the story of I and recognize the emptiness, the no-thingness at the core of existence. Let go of identification with this body, this mind, this personality. See that there is no fixed, permanent, separate self. Meanwhile, the psychological tradition of individuation teaches something that sounds completely different. It says, become yourself. Realize your unique expression. Integrate all the parts of your psyche into wholeness. Don't lose yourself in the collective. Don't dissolve into the crowd. Become fully, uniquely, authentically you. These sound contradictory. One says let go of self. The other says become yourself. But they're pointing to the same liberation from two different angles. Non-self doesn't mean you disappear. It means you stop clinging to a fixed idea of who you are. You stop defending the story. You stop needing to be special or right or better or worse. You realize the self is not a thing, it's a process, a flow, an ever-changing expression of consciousness. Individuation doesn't mean inflating the ego. It means becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts you've rejected. It means realizing you are not just the ego, not just the persona you show the world. You are the totality, the conscious and unconscious, the light and shadow. And when you realize this, you stop identifying with any single part. Both paths lead to the same freedom, freedom from identification. You can live your unique expression without being trapped by it. You can have preferences without being enslaved by them. You can be somebody without clinging to being anybody in particular. This is the synthesis of Carl Jung, empath, and personal development with ancient wisdom. This is where psychology and spirituality finally stop contradicting each other and start revealing the same truth from different languages. But knowing this intellectually changes nothing. You have to live it. You have to practice it. You have to turn this understanding into actual transformation. And that starts with a difficult reckoning. It starts with looking at your own spiritual ego and seeing it clearly without defense, without justification. Let me give you a checklist. Not to shame you, but to illuminate. Not to prove you're failing, but to show you where the real work begins. Do you feel secretly superior to people who haven't done the inner work you've done, even just a little, even just sometimes? Do you need to be the healer, the teacher, the one who guides others? Is your sense of worth connected to being needed for your wisdom? Do you avoid what you call negative emotions? Do you push away anger, fear, sadness because you've decided you're beyond them? Are you chasing peak experiences, the next breakthrough, the next activation, the next level of consciousness? Do you use spiritual language to avoid dealing with actual problems in your life? Bypass conflict with, "It's all perfect." Avoid boundaries with, "We're all one." Dismiss your needs with, "Attachment is suffering." If you answered yes to any of these, and if you're honest, you probably did, then you're caught in the spiritual ego trap. You're still playing the game. You just changed the rules to make it look like you're not playing. But here's what matters: seeing. This is not failure. Seeing this is the beginning of actual awakening. Because you cannot transform what you cannot see. And most people will spend their entire spiritual journey blind to their own spiritual ego, defending it with spiritual concepts, hiding it behind spiritual language. You're not doing that anymore. You're looking. You're seeing. You're getting honest. And from this place of honesty, the real work can finally begin. The work of integration, the work of wholeness, the work of authentic awakening that doesn't bypass your humanity, but embraces it fully. The ego doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be right-sized. It needs to remember its place. Let me show you how. The ego is not your enemy. It's just confused about its job. Right now, for most people, the ego thinks it's the boss. It thinks it runs the whole operation. It makes the decision, sets the course, controls the narrative. It's the CEO of your consciousness, the president of your inner world. And when you begin spiritual practice, the ego doesn't step down. It just rebrands. It becomes the spiritual CEO, making enlightened decisions, pursuing conscious goals, controlling the awakening narrative. But there's a different possibility, a different configuration of the psyche. What if the ego wasn't the master, but the servant? What if it wasn't the driver, but the vehicle? What if it wasn't the king, but the doorkeeper? This is the shift that changes everything. The self, that larger totality of who you are, the center of your whole psyche, the source of your deepest knowing, that becomes the master. The ego becomes its faithful servant, its useful tool, its way of functioning in the world. The ego still exists. You still need it. You need it to navigate the world, to make choices, to have a coherent sense of identity and agency. But it's no longer running the show. It's like this: imagine you have a highly competent assistant. This assistant is excellent at managing logistics, handling day-to-day operations, interfacing with the world. But this assistant is not meant to set the vision. It's It's not meant to determine the direction of your life. It's not qualified to answer the deepest questions of meaning and purpose. That's the ego. Brilliant at its job. Dangerous when it oversteps. The wisdom comes in knowing this. The doorkeeper is dangerous only when it forgets there is a master within. So how do you actually make this shift? How do you move from ego as master to ego as servant? How do you integrate the shadow instead of denying it? How do you live this understanding instead of just knowing it intellectually? Let me give you 5 practices. Not theories, not concepts. Actual practices you can begin today. The first practice is mindfulness without identification. This is where Buddhist wisdom and depth psychology converge perfectly. Both point to the same liberation, the ability to observe your experience without becoming it. In Buddhist practice, this is Vipassana insight meditation. You observe sensations, emotions, thoughts as they arise and pass away. You see their impermanence. You recognize they are not self. You don't suppress them. You don't indulge them. You simply see them clearly. In psychological work, this is the cultivation of the observing ego, the witness consciousness. You learn to notice, I am feeling angry, rather than, I am angry. You create space between awareness and experience. You realize you are not your emotions, you are the one aware of emotions. This sounds simple. It's profoundly difficult. Because your whole life you've been identified. When anger arises, you become angry. When fear appears, you become afraid. When the ego wants to feel superior, you become superior. There's no gap, no space, no choice. Mindfulness creates that gap. You're in a conversation, and suddenly you feel defensive. Old pattern, you immediately defend, justify, counterattack. New practice, you notice. There's defensiveness arising. My ego feels threatened. Interesting. Just that pause changes everything. You're no longer unconsciously acting out the pattern. You're aware of it. And with awareness comes choice. You're scrolling social media and you feel a subtle sense of superiority seeing someone's problems. Old pattern, you indulge that feeling, maybe even share your judgment with someone else. New practice, you catch it. There's judgment. There's the ego trying to feel special by putting someone else down. That's my shadow projecting. The practice is simple. Pause, breathe. Witness, choose. Notice what's arising. Name it without judgment. Recognize it as a pattern, not as truth. Choose your response consciously instead of reacting unconsciously. Do this 1,000 times a day. Every time you catch yourself in a pattern, you're breaking its power. Every time you observe without identifying, you're liberating awareness from the prison of automatic reaction. And here's the psychological insight that makes this even more powerful. When we know we are thinking, we are no longer controlled by thought. When we know we are feeling, we are no longer enslaved by feeling. When we know the ego is speaking, we are no longer trapped in its narrative. Awareness is the transformer. Consciousness is the liberator. The second practice is active imagination and shadow work. This is where you stop running from your darkness and start having a conversation with it. In the tradition of depth psychology, active imagination means sitting with images from the unconscious and letting them speak. You don't analyze them. You don't interpret them away. You engage them as if they were real autonomous beings with something to teach you. You can do this with your shadow specifically. Give it a form. Let it have a voice. Ask it what it needs you to know. Find a quiet space. Close your eyes. Call forward the part of you that you've been pushing away. Maybe it's your anger. Maybe it's your neediness. Maybe it's your ambition, your sexuality, your grief, your fear. Don't try to change it. Don't try to fix it or transcend it or love it away. Just let it appear. And ask, what do you need me to know? What are you protecting me from? What happens if I let you out? Then listen. Really listen. Let it speak without censoring, without judgment, without immediately trying to spiritualize what comes up. You might be surprised by what emerges. Your anger might tell you it's been protecting your boundaries that you keep violating. Your neediness might reveal a deep loneliness you've been bypassing with spiritual independence. Your fear might show you it's trying to keep you safe from risks your ego is desperate to take. The shadow isn't random chaos. It's often carrying wisdom you've rejected because it didn't fit your spiritual self-image. And here's the parallel practice from contemplative traditions Vipassana at a deeper level. Not just observing sensations, but seeing into the nature of mind itself. Seeing impermanence, how everything arises and passes. Seeing suffering, how clinging to anything creates pain. Seeing non-self, how there's no fixed, permanent identity to defend. Both practices teach the same fundamental truth. What becomes conscious is no longer destiny. When you bring awareness to the shadow, it transforms. Not because you force it to, but because consciousness itself is the transformer. Light doesn't fight darkness. It simply illuminates, and darkness becomes visible and therefore workable. The third practice is meditation in action. This is the practice of bringing awareness into every single moment of your life, especially the ordinary ones, especially the ones that don't feel spiritual. There's a trap many seekers fall into. They believe awakening happens on the meditation cushion at the retreat center during the breathwork session in the ceremony. Those peak experiences, that's where the real work happens. Right, wrong. The real work happens in washing the dishes, in having a difficult conversation, in feeling frustrated in traffic, in being bored on a Tuesday afternoon, in all the mundane, ordinary, unglamorous moments that make up 99% of your life. This is what embodiment actually means. Actually, not transcending the body and the world, but bringing consciousness fully into both. So you practice awareness in everything. In conversation, you notice, am I actually listening, or am I just waiting for my turn to speak? Am I present with this person, or am I performing presence in service? You notice, am I helping because it's what's needed, or am I helping because I need to feel important? Am I giving freely, or am I keeping score? In your spiritual practice itself, you notice, am I meditating to be present, or am I meditating to become someone who meditates? Am I sitting in silence, or am I performing enlightenment? This is ruthless honesty. This is the sword that cuts through spiritual pretense. And it's summed up perfectly in the teaching when washing dishes, just wash the dishes. Not thinking about the past, not planning the future, not trying to transcend dishwashing. Just fully present with the warm water, the soap, the plate in your hands. That's awakening, not in the extraordinary, but in being fully alive to the ordinary. The fourth practice is walking the middle way between dissolution and individuation. This is the practice that integrates Carl Jung empath and personal development with the deepest spiritual wisdom. You're not trying to dissolve your individuality into some formless void. And you're not trying to inflate your ego into some grandiose spiritual identity. You're finding the middle way. On one hand, you practice individuation. You become more fully yourself. You integrate your shadow. You develop your unique gifts. You live your authentic expression. You don't lose yourself in the collective. You don't disappear into some spiritual ideal of egolessness. On the other hand, you practice non-attachment to that self. You hold your identity lightly. You don't cling to being anybody in particular. You recognize the emptiness, the fluidity, the constructed nature of all identity. You are both somebody and nobody, both a unique wave and the entire ocean, both an individual expression and empty awareness itself. What does this look like in practice? You have strong preferences, but you're not enslaved by them. You like what you like, but you don't need reality to conform to your preferences to be okay. You have a clear identity, but you don't defend it desperately. You can be wrong, you can change, you can evolve. You're not clinging to a fixed story of who you are. You pursue growth and development, but you don't need to be better than you were yesterday to be worthy. You're already whole. Growth is just what consciousness does, not a requirement for your okayness. This is the paradox of true maturity. You are fully human and empty of inherent self at the same time. You live your unique expression without identification. You are free to be you because you're not trapped in being you. The fifth practice is the natural evolution from awareness to compassion. This is where all the work pays off in the most beautiful way. When you've done the work of seeing your own shadow, something miraculous happens. You stop judging others, not because you force yourself to be more loving, but because you finally understand. You see someone being defensive, and instead of judging them as ego-driven, you recognize, oh, that's the same defensiveness I feel when I'm scared. You see someone performing spirituality, and instead of calling them fake, you recognize, I do that too. We're all just trying to be okay. This is where psychological insight becomes compassion. When you know your own darkness, you stop projecting it onto others. You stop making them the enemy. You stop needing them to be wrong so you can be right. The tradition speaks of this as love arising from insight. When you truly see yourself, love for others becomes natural, not as a spiritual accomplishment, not as something you force yourself to feel, but as the automatic response of a heart that knows its own brokenness. And the Buddhist teaching points to the same truth: compassion blossoms when wisdom ripens. Metta loving-kindness and karuna compassion aren't separate practices from wisdom. They're what wisdom becomes when it's embodied. But notice the shift in the quality of compassion. Before shadow work, your compassion might have been, I will save you. I will fix you. I know what you need. After shadow work, your compassion becomes, I see your struggle because I know my own. I'm not here to rescue you. I'm here to see you, to witness you, to hold space for your process. The ego's compassion needs to be the hero. The self's compassion simply understands. The ultimate truth isn't transcendence. It's this deep, abiding, unshakable compassion that arises when you finally stop running from your own humanity. These 5 practices aren't separate. They're facets of the same diamond. They're different doorways into the same room. And that room is your wholeness. Practice them, not to become enlightened, not to transcend the ego, but to become real, to become integrated, to become authentically, messily, beautifully human. And from that place of integrated humanity, something new can emerge. So what does true awakening actually look like? Let me tell you what it's not. It's not floating above the human condition in a permanent state of bliss. It's not never feeling anger, fear, or sadness. It's not being so transcendent that you're above the struggles of ordinary life. It's not having all the answers. It's not being healed of all wounds. It's not becoming someone who never has an ego reaction. If that's what you think awakening is, you've been sold a fantasy. And that fantasy is exactly what keeps you trapped in the spiritual ego. True awakening is something far more real, far more grounded, and far more liberating than the sanitized version the spiritual marketplace sells you. True awakening is standing on the ground, with your feet firmly planted, fully present in this moment, exactly as it is. It's seeing your ego when it arises and smiling at it. It's noticing your shadow when it emerges and welcoming it. It's feeling your emotions fully and not becoming them. It's being deeply, authentically, unapologetically human and being free at the same time. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in an actual human being. The truly awakened person catches their spiritual ego in real time. They notice when they're feeling superior. They catch themselves when they're performing enlightenment. They see when they're using spiritual language to bypass real issues. And instead of defending it or denying it, they laugh. There it is again, the ego doing its thing. There's no shame in this recognition. There's just clarity. And from that clarity comes freedom. The truly awakened person welcomes their shadow as a teacher. When anger arises, they don't push it away or spiritualize it. They feel it. They ask what it's protecting. They listen to its wisdom. When fear appears, they don't bypass it with affirmations. They meet it with curiosity. What is this fear trying to tell me? They've stopped splitting themselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts. They've stopped performing wholeness while hiding their brokenness. They're integrated, all parts welcome, all parts seen, all parts belonging to the totality of who they are. The truly awakened person serves without needing validation. They help when helping is what's needed, and they walk away when it's not. They don't need to be the healer, the teacher, the guru. They don't need broken people around them to feel whole. They give freely and without attachment to outcome. They've let go of the savior complex. They've realized that everyone is on their own journey, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people have their experience without trying to fix it. The truly awakened person feels deeply without drowning. They don't suppress emotion and they don't indulge it. They feel grief and they let it move through. They feel joy and they let it expand. They feel the full spectrum of human experience without needing it to be different than it is. They've stopped chasing permanent peace and started living with present peace. Peace not as a state they achieve, but as a quality of awareness they bring to each moment. The truly awakened person judges less and loves more. Not because they force themselves to be more loving, but because they've seen their own darkness and they know everyone carries the same struggle. Judgment falls away naturally when you stop projecting your shadow onto others. They've developed what we might call mature compassion, not the compassion that needs to rescue, but the compassion that simply understands. This is what the wisdom tradition pointed to when it said, "The enlightened do not differ from ordinary people, except in that they know they too can fall." They're not above it. They're not beyond it. They're just aware of it. And that awareness is everything. And this echoes the deepest teaching from contemplative wisdom: there is no path that leads to happiness. Happiness is the path when the mind is no longer bound by the story of I and mine. You don't become happy when you're enlightened. You realize you already are when you stop defending the ego, when you stop clinging to outcomes, when you stop needing reality to be different than it is. Awakening isn't a destination. It's a quality of being. It's available right now in this moment exactly as you are. Not when you become more spiritual, more conscious, more evolved. Now, as this messy, imperfect, beautifully human being. So who are you now after this journey we've taken together? You're different than you were 50 minutes ago. You've been given eyes to see what most spiritual seekers will spend years avoiding. You can see the spiritual ego now, not just in others, but in yourself. You can catch it when it tries to claim superiority, when it performs enlightenment, when it uses spirituality to bypass your humanity. You've been given tools to integrate the shadow instead of denying it. You know how to pause and witness instead of react. You know how to dialogue with your darkness instead of running from it. You know how to bring awareness into the ordinary instead of only seeking the extraordinary. You've been shown a path of authentic awakening that doesn't require you to transcend your humanity. A path that invites you to descend into it, to embrace it, to live it fully. And you've been given permission to be messy, to be imperfect, to be in process, and to call that holy. Permission to stop performing and start being real. This isn't a destination. This is a way of being, an ongoing practice, a continuous returning to awareness, to honesty, to wholeness. You'll forget. Your ego will dress up again. Your shadow will call for attention in ways you don't expect. You'll catch yourself in patterns you thought you'd moved beyond. And that's perfect. That's the practice. Each time you notice you're awakening. Each time you catch yourself, you're free. Each time you smile at your ego, instead of believing it, you're liberated. The work is never done. And that's not a problem. That's life. That's the beauty of being human and conscious at the same time. You have a new lens now. Question spiritual superiority, especially your own. When you hear yourself or someone else creating hierarchies of consciousness, pause. Remember, there is no ladder, just different expressions of the same source. You have new power now. The power to transform pain into wisdom, shadow into light fragmentation, into wholeness. Not by denying the pain, but by illuminating it. Not by fighting the shadow, but by integrating it. Not by transcending your humanity, but by fully inhabiting it. This is where the great wisdom traditions meet in perfect harmony. Where psychology and spirituality finally stop contradicting and start completing each other. Liberation doesn't come from defeating the ego. It comes from seeing it clearly and smiling. The ego isn't your enemy. It's your teacher. It will show you exactly where you're still identified, where you're still clinging, where you're still trying to be special or superior or separate. And every time it shows you this, you have a choice. You can defend it, you can deny it, or you can see it, acknowledge it, and choose differently. That's freedom. Not from having an ego, but from being enslaved by it. Not from having shadow, but from being controlled by it. Not from being human, but from being trapped in the illusion of what human means. Your new relationship with ego is simple. It's there. You know, it's there. And you're not fooled by its costumes anymore. It will dress up as spiritual ambition. You'll catch it. It will whisper that you're more evolved than others. You'll laugh. It will try to make you special through your awakening. You'll see right through it. Not your enemy, your teacher. The most faithful teacher you'll ever have if you're willing to learn from it. The ego is not the problem. Believing it is all of you, that's the trap. And you're not in that trap anymore. You're awake, not because you've transcended anything, but because you've descended into everything, into your wholeness, into your humanity, into the beautiful, messy, perfect as it is reality of being conscious in a human form. And from this place, feet on the ground, heart in the present, eyes wide open, you can finally live. Not as someone trying to be spiritual, but as someone being real. This is the awakening that lasts. This is the liberation that doesn't fade when the retreat ends or the ceremony wears off. This is the freedom that comes from finally being honest about who and what you are. All of it. Light and shadow, ego and self, human and divine, broken and whole. You are all of it, and you are free. If this journey hit you differently than other spiritual content you've encountered, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment about which mask you recognized in yourself. Be brave enough to be honest. Your honesty might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to start their own reckoning. Share this with someone who's still caught in the spiritual ego trap. We all need this mirror. We all need to be reminded that the work isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. And if you want to keep diving deeper into this intersection of depth, psychology, shadow work, and authentic transformation, subscribe. Because we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in this territory where psychology meets spirituality, where ancient wisdom meets modern understanding, where the path becomes clear when we finally stop running from ourselves. The real work begins now. Not the work of becoming someone else. The work of becoming fully, authentically, courageously yourself. Welcome to being beautifully, messily, powerfully awake. Welcome home.